Thank you for joining me. Today I'm going to be talking to you about least common multiple. All right. Before we get started into some examples, let's take a look at some terms you need to be familiar with. First of which, product. We need to know what a product is. That is the answer to a multiplication problem. Because least common multiples are dealing in multiplication, it's important for you to know that term. Multiple. It's in the term least common multiple, so we need to know that as well. A multiple is simply the product of any value in an integer. So in other words, multiplication. So examples of that are down below. 3, 6, 9, 12 would all be multiples of 3. 5, 10, 15 would all be multiples of 5. So you can see it's really just the continuation in a series of numbers. Finally, what is least common multiple all put together? It's the lowest positive number that is divisible by each value given. And that's what we're going to be finding. So as we work our way through multiples, we're going to try to find the lowest value that they have in common. So the first method, I'm going to show you two different methods here, and the first one is called the multiple method. And the multiple method really just requires you to continue the multiples of each number until you find one that they have in common. So we're going to start with 5, and you do these one at a time. We're going to start with 5, and we're going to go out maybe 5 or 6 multiples out just to get started. So of course the first one is 5, the next one would be 10, then 15, then 20, 25, 30. Okay, and I'll stop there for just a moment because you don't know how far you would have to go out, and we're not really trying to waste time. So let's start with 9 and see where that goes with 9. And you're going to do the same thing with 9, and it's really just multiplication. It's 9 times 1, which gives you 9, then 9 times 2, which would give you 18. Okay, 9 times 3, 27. 9 times 4, 36, and 9 times 5, which would be 45. Now you'll notice we've kind of gone past our multiples of 5, and we still don't have any in common. So let's go ahead and jump back up to our 5s and continue that. So the next one would be 35, then 40, and then 45. And you'll notice once we get to 45 that we finally found two multiples, or one multiple I should say, that is common between the two values, and that's going to be your least common multiple. So your answer to this problem would be 45 as your LCM. Now again, that's a little bit of a timely way to do it. If you know your multiples, it actually can be kind of quick. However, if you have larger numbers larger than 5 and 9, maybe some double-digit numbers, it can be a little bit more complicated. But let's look at one more example using that method. Let's find the multiples, or the least common multiple of 9 and 12. So we'll start with 9. All right, and before we already did 9, so we're going to go out a couple of places here. 18 would be the second one. 9 times 3 is going to give you 27, which is your third one. All right, 9 times 4, which is 36. And then 9 times 5, or 9 times 5, yes, 45, excuse me. There we go, and we'll stop there for the time being. And now you can see we got into some double digits here with 12, so that can be a little bit more complicated. But again, keep in mind that you're just moving through multiplication. So off to the side, if you have to do some scratch work, 12 times 2, to remember what that is or to know what that is, you can see that's going to give you 24. If you have to do that with the other ones, be sure to do that because we want you to be correct here. So we see we have the second one would be 24, which means the third one then, 12 more, would give you 36. So we can see then, we can go ahead and stop. We have 36 on top, 36 on the bottom. That is the first value you come to that they have in common. That's your answer, 36. All right. The next example we're going to look at is going to be called the ladder method. Now this one in particular was better with larger values. However, we have the two values 4 and 7. So to do the ladder method, you're going to write 4 and then 7. And if you watch the greatest common factor video, you saw a very similar method. It actually is very, very similar. You do it the exact same way. What you're going to do is you're going to look for a value that divides evenly into both these numbers. So looking at 4 and 7, hopefully you're thinking there isn't one. And you're right. If you figure out that there is not one that divides in evenly, that actually makes your job a little bit easier. Because all that is then is the multiplication of 4 and 7. You multiply 4 and 7 together if there's no numbers that divide in evenly. So 4 times 7 is going to give you 28, and you have found your LCM. If you use the other method, you would have to count out 4, 8, 12, 16, 20 until you get out to 28 with 4, and then you would have to do that with 7 as well, unless you just knew it. But that's the latter method. There is no number that divides in evenly like 2, which in this case it can't, then you just multiply the two numbers together. All right, let's look at one more like that. 8 and 12, okay? So let's go ahead and set up our ladder. We have 8 and 12 that we're going to work with here. And just like I mentioned before, you're looking for a number that divides into 8 and 12 evenly. So again, I would just stick with the lowest number unless you know one that's larger. This case, we're just going to stick with 2. Could you use 4? Sure, you could use 4. But for right now, let's use 2. 2 goes into 8 4 times, and 2 goes into 12 6 times. All right. We'll enclose that. Now we're looking for two numbers that go into, or a number, excuse me, that goes into 4 and 6. And that, again, is going to be 2. So 2 goes into 4 2 times, and into 6 3 times. And if you watch the greatest common factor video, you're probably thinking, well, I thought we were trying to find least common multiple, not greatest common factor. Well, let me show you how you do that. Greatest common factor here would have been 4, because you just multiply those two numbers together to get your greatest common factor. However, to find least common multiple, we're going to use all of the numbers that are outside. And notice what it actually makes here. Let me do that one more time. We'll just do it in a different color. I want you to notice if you go ahead and enclose all of the numbers, it makes an L shape. That L shape, least common multiple. Something to help you remember how to identify, if you're using this method for greatest common factor and least common multiple, which one's which. The least common multiple is going to make that L. Now again, the reason why we stopped here at the bottom is because there is no value that goes into 2 and 3 together evenly. So we stop. We make our L, and then for those of you who know the greatest common factor ladder method, you should know what to do now. You multiply. So we're going to multiply all those numbers in our L. 2 times 2 times 2 times 3. All right, now just be careful here because again, 2 times 2 times 2 sometimes we think is 6, and it's not. 2 times 2 times 2 is actually 8. So your multiplication here is actually 8 times 3, which is 24. So your least common multiple for 8 and 12 would be 24. All right, so let's take a look at a word problem then. This is a similar example actually. At the local grocery store, hot dogs are sold in packs of 8 and 12. Are sold in packs of 8 and buns are sold in packs of 12. What is the lowest number of hot dogs and buns that can be bought to have an equal number of each? So again, your key term here, if you're trying to decide should I find the greatest common factor, should I try to find the least common multiple, notice the word lowest. That is pretty much going to show up in one way, shape, or form. In other words, they may use the word least or lower, something to that effect. That's going to give away that this is actually a least common multiple problem, not greatest common factor. So they give us our two values of 8 and 12. And we can go ahead and set up how we did it. Now I realize we just did this in the ladder method, so let me go back and do this in the multiple method, finding the multiples, so you can see how it would be done that way. So let's find the multiples of 8. Your multiples of 8 would be 16. All right, and then 8 times 3 gives you 24. Then 8 times 4 gives you 32. So I'm going to stop there for a moment. And we're going to go to 12. And you notice right away, once you do the second multiple of 12, which is 24, that we get the answer, which we should have already known from the last example, of 24. So what that means is that is the lowest number of hot dogs and buns that can be bought so that you don't have anything left over. No extra hot dogs, no extra buns. All right, and that is a quick tutorial on least common multiple. Thank you for joining me.